Welcome everybody to another Unleash Opportunity session. Many thanks for all of you who have joined us from different organizations and geographies in the world. It is great to be back and host this digital talk focused on farm-to-fork transparency recipes from the food and agriculture sector. My name is Raquel Mota, and I'll be your host for today. I work as a sustainability expert at a food sustainability expert at Untitled. A quick note on some webinar logistics. So I see we already have 45 attendees in the room, so everyone will be kept muted and questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. So please, you can use the question box, which you can see here in the figure. And when addressing your question, include the name of the panelist that you would like to answer, please. All right. Okay, but enough about technicalities. Let me invite our panelists to short introduce themselves. We have today two very active members of Untitled joining us, representing the food and beverage sector, which are Mina and Hannah. Mina, I'll give the word for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Great that you're joining the webinar. My name is Mina Melgan Hansen, and for the past 3 years, I've been a part of the Danish retailer selling groups, the group quality department, where we are a team of 2 people working with responsible procurement.
There seemed to be a time lag. Sorry about that. So I suggest actually we turn off the cameras for the time being and we pass on the word to you, Hannah.
Exactly.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here this morning. My name is Hanna Helgesdotter Sadling, and I work as a sustainability manager at Systembolaget, which is a state-owned Swedish retail monopoly in Sweden for alcoholic beverages. And I have been working with Systembolaget for the past 5 to 6 years within supply chain compliance and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you a lot. And thank you, Mina. Although we couldn't hear all your presentation, you're going to have more time to talk, of course. We also have 2 experts from OECD joining us. So I'll give the word to them. Perhaps, Shivani, you can start.
Yes, hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Shivani Kanabiran. I work at the OECD's Center for Responsible Business Conduct. I think many of you know the OECD. It's an international organization that brings together over 35 countries. But we do work on a range of issues from tax, education, but also responsible investment and expectations that these countries, together with other stakeholders, have put forward in terms of what do we expect businesses today to do to really be seen as responsible businesses. And I'm pleased to be here today. I lead the work that we're doing in responsible agricultural supply chains. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Rina Hinoshita now.
Thank you, Shivani. Hi, my name is Rena Hinoshita. I'm working together with Shivani at the OECD Center for RBC, and particularly in the agriculture sector. And currently, we are promoting the engagement with business in Southeast Asia and other regions. And I'm very happy to hear to share our experience and then listen to your voice today. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Shivana and Rina. And last but not least, on the Untitled side, we have my colleague, Anna Stanker.
Thank you very much, Raquel, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Anna Stanker. I am a manager at Untitled. I've been with Untitled for the past 3 years, and I'm currently working together with Raquel, our host, on the food sustainability strategy of our organization. I'm very pleased to be with you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion of today.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you a lot. Beautiful panel. So now that the audience already know our panel, let me present our agenda of today. So we will start with Anna, presenting Amfori's work on food and agriculture, followed by our panelists from OECD sharing their work for an effective farm-to-fork due diligence. Then, around 10:35, we will have Selling Group and System Bolaget sharing their recipes to farm-to-fork transparency in practice. And the last 20 minutes will be dedicated for dialogue and questions and answers with our panelists regarding the role of collaboration and innovation to foster transparency. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. I'll give the word to Anna.
Thank you very much. I'll keep my camera off, being mindful of the time lag. So I will take a few minutes of this webinar to introduce at high level the work that Amfori is doing and has been doing on food and agricultural supply chain. I think many of you know Amfori for its work in terms of social and environmental sustainability in the traditional manufacturing sectors, textile, garment, plastic, chemical supply chains. However, since 2019, Amfori has taken a strong commitment in terms of its organizational strategy to put in the forefront also food and agricultural supply chain in order to expand member support towards better improved due diligence in global supply chains. And there have been a number of drivers that have really led us in this direction. First of all, it might not be a known fact, but a vast share of the membership of Amfori is composed of food retailers, and we see that there is an increasing need and interest from the side of our members to gear up their sustainability activities in food supply chain, particularly in their private labels. This is certainly fed and driven also by the global trends in increasing demand for food and prices, but we have seen, or we see also a very strong relation with the accountability needs and the reporting needs that the Sustainable Development Goals have brought in. Sustainable Development Goals that highlight under many development objectives the interlinkages with our food systems and with sustainable global food supply chains. So this has been our starting point in 2019 to really look at our services and see how we can extend the quality, but also the portfolio of services through which we are serving our members. Next slide, please. Thank you. We are aware of being one among many sustainability players in the food arena, and I believe our distinctive nature comes from being a business association. That means that we work extremely closely with our members, food retailers, importers, and brands to understand and address their sustainability risk and support them in generating and reporting on impacts in their supply chain. Our challenge, of course, on the other hand, is that of identifying scalable solutions and lean solutions that can be executed across different geographies and across different product groups. Our core value proposition is centered around two groups of services. On the one hand, performance assessment with third-party audits that can be executed within supply chain, but also particularly with the Zero Tolerance Protocol, which is specifically oriented to the identification of flagrant human rights or environmental violations in global supply chains, including food supply chains. This is complemented by our services related to remediation and improvement. So we are proud to support our members in their efforts to remedy findings and violations which are identified through the assessment tools, but also particularly to support factories and producers within their supply chain to extend their capacity and their understanding of sustainability through an extensive portfolio of capacity building. And all of this is done according to 3 core principles that are really at the core of our philosophy, that is collaboration. So we believe that collaboration among our member companies can reduce the cost and the fatigue that can be generated by monitoring and extensive auditing. Second element is cascade effect, so engagement of producers, factories, but also auditors, internal auditors within supply chains to promote the principles and values of our codes of conduct. And the third element, which links to our capacity building, is really empowerment. That means making sure that we can extend support, guidance and tools to all actors within the supply chains, from our members down the supply chain to their producers, to better embed the principles of BSCI in their company practices and policies. So given those foundations, and I'll ask for next slide, please. So given those foundations, we have defined a journey for ourselves, for our company, that really aims at closing the loop. So our next 3 years will be dedicated to improving and extending, beefing up really the performance assessment tools that we are able to make available to our members in the food supply chains. And this includes extensive collaboration with other standards. We already have a partnership in place with MSC, and we are in close consultations with Global Gap and with SCI platform in order to indeed leverage each other's monitoring efforts and reduce audit fatigue. On the upper side of the circle, you see areas in which we believe that we can extend our support to members. And those are risk identification with better supply chain mapping and sustainability intelligence on food supply chains on the one hand, but also accountability on the other hand. And this is where reporting, but also engagement in grievance mechanism really will play a role. So it is important for us to make sure that across our portfolio of strategic projects, in our 3 years development vision, food and agricultural supply chain always play a role. Next slide, please. And this is where indeed we see a strong intersection between our engagement in terms of delivering sustainability services in food supply chain and the transparency needs of our member company. So we believe that is going to be critical for us to support our members in mapping their supply chains beyond tier 1, as we know that the critical hotspots of sustainability in food supply chain are very often found at primary production level. And this also means thinking out of the box and bringing in innovative way of monitoring food supply chains, which are able to better cater for supply chains with variable configurations in terms of seasonality, rotation of production, but also variation and changes that are linked to weather conditions and increasingly to climate change. And finally, we believe that there is a role to play here in our food strategy in terms of tracking the positive impact that our member strategies can generate in food supply chain, and making sure that members, producers, businesses within supply chain are able to report on risk, but also report on impact, and therefore link their work to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we will see moving on how technology and innovation has been playing a strong role in the strategy of our members, such as Sailing Group and Systembolaget, and how also Amfori is taking the route of investing increasingly in our digital solution in order to support better accountability and transparency. Thank you very much, and I would pass the floor now to our colleagues from the OECD.
Thanks a lot, Anna. Okay, so without further ado, I will give the word to Shivani and Reena.
Great, thank you, Raquel, and a big thank you to Amfori for inviting us to present and to be part of this webinar. Let's just go directly into the first slide, please. So what I wanted to speak to all of you today about is the the OECD-FAO guidance for responsible agricultural supply chains. The OECD, as I explained earlier in my introduction, it's an international organization, and one of the things that we do is actually put forward standards and approaches that actually put forward recommendations of what the expectations are in terms of responsibility from governments towards businesses. And this guidance was actually elaborated together with the FAO. So it's actually one of the few instruments that we have at the OECD targeted to businesses that is a combined effort from two organizations, the FAO, which obviously many of you know given your links to the food sector, and the OECD. One of them, I would say, and I'd like to focus on that today, is the value add of this guidance is that it offers a practical framework for companies along the entire value chain. And when I speak about the value chain, I'm including investors as well in here, from those that are involved. And of course, we know when we talk about agriculture, people often speak about the farmers, but what we're talking about is every actor in the value chain. So we're talking to input suppliers, those that provide seeds, fertilizers, of course, farmers involved in production, aggregators. So I'm talking about traders that are in food or non-food agricultural commodity trading, exporters, cooperatives, those that process different agricultural goods, all the way up through retailers, which I know there are many of the retailers are part of Amferi's network, for example. So we're really looking at that full value chain. So that's one of the first aspects of the guidance. It actually brings together, and we talked a little bit about collaboration just now, but the guidance actually provides in a way, a universal framework that all actors in the value chain can be part of. The other important point of this guidance that took about 3 years to develop together with businesses, with policymakers, with civil society, with worker representatives, with supply chain experts. So really quite a broad coalition of different stakeholders, is that it covers really quite a wide range of risks that you see. So we're talking about things like human rights, labor rights, but also health and safety, food security and nutrition, animal welfare, governance, environmental issues, access to land, also technology and innovation. So it's not a siloed approach, because we also know that many of these issues, as we see at the SDGs, for example, there are lots of interlinkages. So that's the other bonus, I would say, of the guidance, is that it provides a comprehensive coverage of different issues that companies need to be aware of. So again, full value chain, multiple issues. Finally, this practical framework that I mentioned earlier, it's really not rocket science. It's something that, with businesses, we identified as a way, and in many cases, many businesses are already implementing this framework for risk-based due diligence into their own operations and into their supply chains. So it's something that's very practical. It can be adapted, and it lays out very clearly in this guidance that we've developed the steps that companies need to take, examples of how this can be embedded within their operations, and then importantly, in looking at the risks that we've identified earlier, actions that companies can potentially take. Again, it's a guidance, it's recommendations. It doesn't go into full details, and it's certainly something that companies themselves need to take on board and further develop in terms of actual tools. And this is where it's very interesting, the tools and ideas that Amfori brings to the table, because that certainly can link very clearly into the OECD-FAO guidance. So I think it's a really good opportunity for us to be here today together with Amfori and with you. And I look forward to your questions. I am going to turn it over now to my colleague Rena, who will talk about some of the more implementation type work that we're doing, because we do, in addition to actually coming up with these guidances, which can be quite, I understand, theoretical in a way. It's necessary, but still remains theoretical. The OECD also supports implementation work. So I'll turn it over to Reina, but of course I'll be available and very happy to answer any questions. And also to add that all of this is being recorded, and we're very happy to also take questions even after this webinar if you'd like to get in touch with us. So I'll end it there and turn it over to my colleague Reina.
Thank you, Shivani. So as Shivani mentioned, the OECD-FAO guidance was developed in a multi-stakeholder process. And now I'd like to talk about how OECD is supporting business in implementing due diligence for transparent supply chains. So in the past few years, we are working closely with business to increase understanding and uptake of the OECD-FAO guidance recommendations in the regions such as Southeast Asia and Latin America and globally. So in 2018, the OECD and FAO carried out a pilot project with over 30 companies and industry initiatives operating in the agriculture sector. The pilot activities included surveys and series of peer learning webinars and several meetings with businesses only, as well as roundtables with various stakeholders, including policymakers, civil societies, and unions. Yes, back then we could still travel and meet with a big group of people. Anyhow, so we found that many companies in this pilot have clear policy commitment for RBC in place. But we also found gaps in how they have translated policy commitment into due diligence actions, like risk assessment and management in their supply chains. So this is challenging because companies need not only internal buy-in and support, but also from their suppliers and business partners to make these actions work effectively. So, but it is critical for transparent supply chains. So given the complexity of agriculture supply chains, it is also important for companies to prioritize risks and their actions to respond to these risks. OECD-FAO guidance provides examples of how-tos for such prioritization. We also noted that many companies use third-party certification programs, which may or may not align with international standard on due diligence. So we are very keen on working with these programs to bridge such gaps. The pilot also identified areas of improvements in companies' public reporting on their due diligence process that should include risks they found and action they have taken to address these risks. We are currently implementing a similar pilot in Southeast Asia with about 20-something companies under the program funded by the EU. And the final report of this pilot will be available next month. So feedback from the majority of participating companies was that this pilot was actually an opportunity for them to better understand international expectations on RBC and due diligence, and to become more aware of the needs for undertaking due diligence across their supply chains. One key takeaways, but not surprising one, is that regulation in countries where they operate and export, as well as business partners' requirements, motivate them to improve their RBC and due diligence implementation. And we found that similarly to the OECD-FAO global pilot, public reporting should be encouraged and improved. So I wanted to briefly touch on our work in Latin America as well. We conducted a diagnostic study in agriculture sector in Latin America, and we are preparing a brief survey to better understand companies' due diligence practice in the region. As Southeast Asia pilot participants said, this survey can be an opportunity for your subsidiaries, suppliers, business partners to know more about RBC and due diligence. So please contact us if you could help us disseminating this survey in coming months. Okay, next slide, please. So here's just a list of links to publication we mentioned during this webinar and for your information. Next slide, please. Shibani, would you like to add something?
No, I think I'm doing a good job and I'm conscious of time. I'd like to leave time for questions. So
okay. Right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shivani and Rina. It's great to hear a little bit more about your work and also especially on the guidance your experience with the pilots. Let's continue building upon experience sharing. I will invite Mina to share a bit more about her experience from Saling Group. The floor is yours, Mina.
Perfect, thank you. And to start off, I would like to say a huge thank you to the Amfori team and to especially Anna and Raquel for inviting me to share Saling Group's transparency journey. It's a topic that is near and dear to our heart and very important to us. So it's a great pleasure to be here with these very competent and great panelists. Yes, next slide. Yeah, next slide. So before I go into or deep dive into the transparency work, I would just like to give you an overview of who we are and what our business looks like in order for you to be better able to understand our position with transparency. Next slide. So we are Denmark's largest retailer, and our core business consists of what we call our brick and mortar formats, which are our discount, super, and hypermarket chains, Netto, Føtex, and Bilka. Some of you who are placed in Germany or Poland might already be familiar with Netto because we operate also internationally on those markets. But besides the brick and mortar, which also includes department stores, and since last year, we gained rights to the Top Toys in Denmark and now operate the BR, or what we call BR Fata stores in Denmark. We also have a very wide online business, something that has only been growing very fast due to the challenges that COVID has posed, where we have an online marketplace, Whoopty, but also corresponding online businesses for Føtex and Bilka and Netto as well. And we have, on top of all of that, also meal subscription services, flour subscription service, and we are the official franchisor for Carl's Jr. and Starbucks in Denmark. So this gives an overview of the complexity of our business, which only basically shows that our supply chains are extremely complex, very, very global, and contain a lot of players. Next slide. And that leads to why responsible procurement is a very vital part of our core due diligence processes. And it all starts with supply chain traceability and transparency, really, because if we want to know and monitor and have compliance down or upstreams our supply chains, we need to know where our products come from. Like many other retailers, we have started with our private label portfolio, and we go for the most part back to the producer of the final product. And from vendors who apply producers that produce our private labels, we require full transparency back to the tier 1. And in many product groups, especially within food, we go either all the way or further back than tier 1. And from there, we then get a picture of where our producers are placed. And we apply the Amfori country risk classification in order to ask for actual documentation on a social audit, where we of course prefer the BSCI audit, but we also accept other either social audit formats or other standards that have a social element. And in the recent years, we've also been getting to develop more requirements within environmental compliance as well. And yet again, the food product groups are dominating there. Next slide. In terms of our transparency journey, we have actually been members of Amfori for a long time, since 2006, and have always applied the Amfori Code of Conduct as our supplier code of conduct. But in 2015, our executive committee really took our work with supplier due diligence further, with deciding on a company-wide systematic focus, where we integrated requirements into the supplier trading agreement around traceability, but also social compliance. And within the past 5 years, we've onboarded all of our relevant suppliers in a customized third-party developed IT platform, and started monitoring compliance with our responsible procurement policies. And within the past 3-ish years, we've also, due to all the information and data that we've collected, extended our requirements to include environmental compliance as well. Next slide. In terms of transparency and the challenges, there are of course many, and here are some of the internal and external challenges that we have faced and how we have approached these. In terms of internal challenges, the biggest one is handling business sensitive producer information. In the beginning, our vendors were not really very happy to provide us with information around where the products come from, because we are a trader and they are very often an agent or a trader, and that is highly confidential information. We therefore introduced a special confidentiality clause in the trading agreement that we only, the information is not shared internally on producers and locations. It's only us who actually work with the implementation and follow up that have access. And that has been very instrumental. It might sound counterproductive, but that has been very important and successful for us to even get an overview of our supply chains. And we of course hope that in the future years we can get to a place together with our vendors where we can remove this and have full-on traceability. Time and price, it's just the nature of the retail business and of the buying function that it is those two that dominate, and these can sometimes push the vendors to have to apply an agent themselves in order to get an appropriate producer, and that can pose some challenges in terms of getting the transparency, because then there's increased complexity. Also availability, sometimes a specific product in the specs that we need is only available from one place, and that sort of gives the producer an upper hand in dictating how the information sharing goes. Another important one that is really applicable for both internal or applicable both internally and externally is lack of universally applicable legislation, because it really would give a boost internally as well as externally on these are the rules. We always need to have transparency, and there wouldn't really be a discussion neither from our buyer's perspective. In terms of external challenges, the type of product, to name a few, coffee, tea, cocoa, because the supply chain is so complex, and that of course goes hand in hand with the next point, it's sometimes for us as a retailer at the very end of the supply chain downstream, it sometimes makes it impossible for us to get all the way down to the agricultural chain. So applying a single transparency method is not really possible. Local legislation, because many of the sourcing countries are not very regulated in this area, so producers also are not used to providing the information that we need on the level that we need. And again, as mentioned before, lack of universally applicable legislation. What have we done? Well, we have been building trust with our vendors for all the years that we have had this systematic approach by showing really again and again that we use the information that they provide us in the correct manner, and that we really are interested in getting this transparency in order to be more responsible and be in control of what is happening. Another important thing that we have focused on is reducing standard fatigue and working together with Amfori, working together with the other organizations that are big standardization organizations in order to make sure that that there is a fast set requirement on traceability, and that there is mutual recognition of it, so that we make the lives of our vendors and also ourselves easier, and have better data, more reliable data. And I'm not going to mention it the third time. It's yet to be seen. There are a lot of good discussions going around on legislation and a lot of proposals. We hope this will come, and that this will also take into consideration the needs of the retail sector. Next slide. In terms of how has transparency helped us going beyond audits and in getting continuous improvement, I would say it's more the other way around, that getting more transparency has provided us with the information that we need around what is happening down or upstream in our supply chains. And that has really enabled us to collate data, to analyze data, and to determine where it is that we need to focus on. But of course, after that, it's sort of a reinforcing thing where then continuous improvement also enforces more transparency. Next slide. Yeah, and to cap up or go through some of the lessons learned, well, I don't think it can be stressed enough that traceability is key to sustainable sourcing, and especially to obtaining the visibility that we need all the way down to agriculture. Retailers have an important role to play in achieving more supply chain transparency. It is us who are the consumer-facing organization. We have a responsibility, and we shouldn't only accept the word or the knowledge that something is either complicated or something is in place. We need to also ensure that things are in place ourselves. And we need to make ourselves more visible producers. Going back a little on what was shown on the last slide, it is good for producers. It's more value for their money if they know that we are actually meaning business and actually checking and actually knowing who they are. And of course, again, harmonization and mutual recognition is instrumental in the whole transparency journey. And lastly, in terms of COVID and how transparency has helped us there, is that all the data that we have gathered and all the data that further data that it has helped us gather has given us sort of an upper hand in knowing which geographical hotspots there are and specific risk groups, so that we can better support our buying teams already on beforehand in terms of the challenges that might come. Yes, being mindful of the time and looking forward to all your questions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mina. Always great to have exchanges from you. I really like the collaborative approach that you presented, and also being mindful of time. Let's continue sharing transparency recipes by hearing more about the work that Systembolaget is doing. So Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Raquel. And once again, thank you for having me to share Systembolaget's journey on this. Can you move to the next slide? You can actually skip 2 slides straight away. So, thank you. So just a brief overview of who Systembolaget is. We are the Swedish state-owned retail monopoly for alcoholic beverages. In practice, that means that our stores are the only stores where you can buy alcohol in Sweden, unless you are in a restaurant. And we exist to limit the harmful effects of alcohol. And that's also the reason why we are allowed to exist as a monopoly within the EU framework. But that also comes with requirements of being transparent in our purchasing process, to provide equal treatment for all the products and the producers in our assortment. So yeah, it puts us in a slightly different context than some other companies. We are a company with several stores all over the country, but we also have around 650 Swedish suppliers supplying products to us, and around it moves a little bit, around 16,000 products. And this, I think, really is the challenge that we're talking about in this forum, that 16,000 articles, and unlike what many people think when they think of, for example, wine supply chains, you know, they see the sunsets, the vineyard on the hill, etc. There could actually be hundreds of producers and growers behind each product. So how then do you reach traceability? So I will share some of our challenges and what we are doing to try to overcome them. Next slide, please. So challenge number one, how to get everyone on board. For us, one of the key things that we did was to define why. We earlier recognized that our biggest risk for human rights violations were at the beginning of the supply chain, and that we would not be able to address them if we did not know where the raw material of the products that we sell come from. And with that understanding also came a need to create mutual understanding internally, that we will have to have several parts of the company work together if we are to address this issue. So that's why we had to include the notion of traceability and transparency into several of our documents, and one of them is our strategic plan, where you can see here the outtake for 2023 is that the entire range is traceable. We also included in our general terms and conditions, which is the same place where we also ask for price and quality. We also have now requirements of traceability towards our Swedish importers. Next slide, please. And then on the notion of legislation, or sorry, the challenge number two would be how to move beyond legislation and worries. And just to mention a few examples of what we've seen on this journey is, as Mina already mentioned, the lack of universally applicable legislation, worries of GDPR, data protection, data sharing of this very sensitive information of a supply chain. This is a business secret to many, so this is something that has to be considered and taken into regard in this work. So one of the things that we have been doing to this is to inform, create policy documents, user guidelines for producers and importers, and more or less share all the information that we had as openly and as transparent as we possibly could towards all actors of the supply chain. We also try to engage what are the concerns of the stakeholders in our supply chain. We held several producer meetings in our purchasing countries, we held importer meetings, and really what we took away from that is that their feedback is what can help you improve and how to further support them. We realized quickly that traceability is just about change in behavior as it is actually gathering the data. And the time needed to spend on this change of behavior should not be underestimated when trying to implement something like this. But I think the most important thing for us on this journey really has been the notion of collaboration. That has been the #1 key to success. It's really important to realize that we could not have done this ourselves. All of this has been done together with our Swedish importers, the producers and the growers really all over the world. So that's something that for us has been a key understanding in this work. And next slide, please. And next challenge. So how to handle all this data? As I mentioned, hundreds of producers and farms behind every product. And the Excel file that you see on the picture is actually our old one. And with this, we used to manually map around 550 products every year. And now we are currently doing 2,500 products, which also represents what we call the fixed range. And we would also be not equivalent, but similar to the private label of a normal retailer. So we map the supply chains of the 2,500 products, but we also map a lot of information, gather data of them. And this, for us, would have not been possible without having a digital tool to help us. And moving from Excel to shareable data in a digital platform allows not only more data to be gathered, but also moving away from the idea of a supply chain being linear. And in the agricultural sector, I would say that this is extra important, given that we have so many growers, there are cooperatives, processing plants, so many actors involved before actually reaching the final product. So for us, that has been a very, very useful tool as well. Next slide, please. And challenge number 4. So for us as a retailer, all of this is risk management, but what's in it for the producers and for the growers? And one of the biggest feedback that we received in the startup phase of this was that producers wanted to know how they could benefit from this. And that it was important to only ask for information that we will actually use and try to show the positive examples as well. So this picture shows how Systembolaget assess risk of each part in the supply chain, meaning that you start off in a risk level based on your origin, and then we gather information on your certificates, and you answer questions in the self-assessment questionnaire, and that could either mitigate or further support the need of follow-up. And so that's what we're using the information for currently, but now we're also looking into how can we use the same information to inform our consumers about which products are more sustainable. And this really helps to gather the interest and the will of the industry to also provide us with this information. Next slide, please. And on the role of continuous improvements, and I think that this is really how to go beyond auditing and how that is interlinked. This picture shows an overview of the around 4,300 parties in the platform that we have currently. And also behind every pin, there's also a lot of sustainability data. And what we can use this information for is to cluster the information and show us potential needs of our producers and areas and topics that we need to focus more on. So what you see here is just a few examples of trainings in the sugar industry for rum, conducting a human rights impact assessment in Italy, and we need to strengthen unions in South Africa. So having all of this information really allows us to take a lot more active role in our supply chain. And I think also on the COVID-19 aspect, I think by knowing the actors in your supply chain, we're also able to directly send them questions related to COVID-19 and to also have their input from hundreds of producers that helped us to give guidance really to our processes in terms of what the producers' needs were and what we as a big buyer could do to facilitate in this very challenging time. So I think for us, having this type of traceability and transparency has been crucial specifically during this time. Next slide, please. So just a few outtakes from us to sum it all up. And number 1 point is that transparency goes both ways. It is if you're asking your supply chain to be transparent with their information, it's really important that you're also transparent with the work that you're doing and what it is that we can improve. And I think this has really been something that we've tried to work a lot with, to communicate as openly as possible. That's not always easy, but to at least try. Secondly, traceability to farm level is needed to audit. That's something also that we learned the hard way. But primarily, traceability enables us to go beyond auditing and find new ways of actually addressing issues together with the supply chain in a completely different way that we were able to before. And lastly, I think it is something that Mina also touched upon, that how is it that we as a retailer can ensure that human rights are not violated if we don't know where our products are produced? So I think that for us has been the main driver really for this work going forward. And that was it from me. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Hannah. Very, very great to hear your experiences. I think when we were doing the panel and I was inviting you all, we were also very interested to understand from our audience what is driving their transparency ambition. So in order to have their collaboration in our session, we set up a poll so they could answer to us what drives their transparency ambition, whether it's a regulatory need, a customer or consumer demand, sectoral pressure, trends, or industry leadership position. I'd like Naomi to please put the poll for our audience. Please let me know if you can see it.
We are receiving answers, Raquel.
I'm sorry?
We are receiving answers as we speak, so they all have access to it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give you a moment to answer to the poll, and then we're going to open to our question and answers. Okay, just a couple of more seconds. I don't know if I can share the results. I can't visualize it. Can you see it, Naomi, the results?
Yes, I am now sharing the results with everyone.
Can you help me navigating to it? Because I don't have visibility of it. So maybe just tell me which one was the biggest driver.
Bear with me. So the last one was the biggest driver with 35%.
Great. Okay, so I see that industry leadership is very important for you. Okay, so I think we have time now to open for some questions from the audience. We have 2 questions and we can then open this dialogue. So the first question is to OECD. I'll go to Shivani. So the question was a bit technical, asking what was the difference between the guidance that you explained and other systems such as the Marine Stewardship Council and the Agriculture Stewardship Council.
Great, thanks for the question. It is quite a technical question. In the first instance, the OECD-FAO guidance, it's a due diligence framework. So it really brings together the different elements of what that means. So from setting up policies, identifying risks, coming up with strategies to address the risks, evaluating certain points in the supply chain as to how those points in the supply chain are conducting due diligence, and then finally reporting. So it's a framework. It's less of a standard of auditing, for example, which is my understanding of what MSC and the aquaculture groups might have. But I don't know those 2 groups intimately, so I can't speak for what they are actually doing. In the second instance, the difference is also that the OECD-FAO guidance is looking at a variety of supply chains. And I have to admit, it's actually primarily in the crop and livestock supply chains, right? I think there are many lessons to be drawn from what we are doing into the fisheries sector. And the fisheries sector, as many of you who are familiar with the fisheries sector know, there are multiple issues, including illegal, unidentified fishing and unregulated fishing, and there are multiple deep issues that need to be looked at as well. However, I do know, and we are actually in touch with the FAO specifically to look, because the FAO is looking to bring forward guidance specifically for the fisheries sector. They're calling it a socially responsible fisheries sector, guidance on that. And we've been in talks with them to see what we can draw from our learnings on this due diligence framework, which we do feel is quite powerful And of course, there are many actors as well, like MSC and ASC involved. And I think that I hope we will see some results from that dialogue. I don't necessarily think we need brand new guidance, but let's see how we can build together on different frameworks that are out there. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Feel free to contact me if you have any.
Thank you so much, Shivani. There is also another question for Mina, which is asking if you are using a custom-built traceability software and whether you could share the name of the provider or at least more details about it.
Yes. So yes, the current system that we use is customly built, or at least the functionalities for us have been tailored just to us. And it's sort of a vendor scoring system where we get the traceability data, and then we also gather documentation on social compliance and in some cases environmental compliance. And the provider is the American company UL.
Thank you. And I see there are 2 more questions coming for OECD as well. So I will touch upon the first one, which is asking whether there will be more pilots in the coming future, and also something more in general, asking if we can combine isolated and necessary actions all together to fulfill the SDGs. The one for the SDGs, see that it's a very broad topic, and considering the time, I would say let's try to answer in a shorter way. But I'll give you the word again, Shivani. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Yes, so answer to the first question, yes, there will be opportunities in other pilots. Much of our work depends on getting funding. So very, very basic, and then all of you are business people listening in, majority I understand. So you'll understand that. There is ongoing work right now in Asia, working with companies in Asia, and ongoing work with companies operating in Latin America. So even if you're a multinational, if you are sourcing or operating, or even if you have suppliers that are or customers in Latin America, please get in touch with Reina and myself. There's definitely opportunities there. Broadly though, we work all the time on these issues. So if there's a high interest from attendees to this webinar to understand more what we're doing and how they can get engaged, please just contact us. On the SDGs and collaboration, I'd say more broadly, yes, I think that's one of the hallmarks, and we've heard that throughout the presentations actually. And I think at the international organization level, there's a real understanding, and the message has come loud and clear from businesses, like, please stop reinventing the wheel. Please help us, level the playing field. We touched very lightly on legislation, for example. And these, I think many of you are aware, are current discussions, certainly at the EU level, on, for example, this horizontal approach to mandatory due diligence. What's quite interesting is also seeing how businesses are stepping up to the plate. Not all businesses, but quite a number actually, saying that, look, we need to have clarity, and legislation provides quite a bit of clarity. We know as well that there's movements, we've seen this across all our different countries, to look at a smart mix, voluntary recommendations, support, and then also legislation on a range of issues. The ones that seem to be top of mind that concern particularly ag are, there's recently been a bit more talk on the cocoa sector. There was a recent launch of a multi-stakeholder dialogue by the EU this week. And deforestation, and that of course concerns many of you in the food sector because of the commodities that are linked to deforestation or forest degradation. But I'll leave it at that. I think the idea to collaborate and to particularly reach the SDGs, we're fast coming up to 2030, is critical. Next year is a big year for food with the UN Food Systems Summit. So I hope to see many of you, and I suspect it will be a hybrid virtual in person. So hopefully we'll be continuing to exchange and moving forward actually. Then I'll stop there so that we can.
Yeah, that really answers the questions. I see there are no more questions coming across, and our time is almost up, basically up. I just would like to ask the panelists, for instance, Hannah, Mina, and Anna, to give a final piece of advice for business who wants to foster farm to fork transparency. If you could give an advice very shortly, what would that be? What can they do first? So very shortly, please, 30 seconds, 1 minute. Perhaps I'll give the word to Hannah.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I think that I will touch upon the point number 2 and point number 1. And I think in terms of technology and innovation, I think for us, what was really important, I mean, I mentioned having a digital platform, that's important, but I think what's even more important about that platform is that the information on there is the different parties only has to fill it in once, and then it can be shared across several actors and even to several retailers. So if there were other retailers on the same system, they would be able to access similar data. And I think that has been very important to gain leverage with the producers and growers so that they actually don't have to repeat the information. So that's something that I would recommend to anyone who's looking into procuring a similar platform, is to look for data shareable instances of it. And then I would also say that in terms of working together with stakeholders, for us, a lot of the transparency and traceability work has also come from the fact that stakeholders in our purchasing countries have been questioning what we have been doing. Are you doing enough, etc. And when they are reporting about misconduct at producers, it's extremely important that we can say whether or not we are linked to them. So I would say that working together with, for example, unions is actually a really good way of helping to push your traceability and transparency agenda forward, because they are really the ones that knows what are going on the ground. So that's something that I would also highly recommend.
Thank you a lot, Hannah. Mina, would you like to give a closure word as well?
Yeah, mine will be short because Hannah said it all, but on top of what she said, basically for businesses to try and go for formats, standards, formats, and systems that are third party and that are out there, so that even if one doesn't have the opportunity to share, you still follow the same methodology. So really look into the standards, the widely used standards and documents, and don't come out with your own. That also includes a transparency requirement, because then again we go down the rabbit hole of having too many different methodologies.
That's completely true, indeed. I'll leave the word to Anna and Shivani if you'd like to add more.
Yes, thank you. I think one piece of advice is this is a journey, and it's amazing to see, we heard from 2 pretty progressive companies, and it's a lot of work. The one piece of advice I would say is, look, there is an international standard out there in the agri sector. Please use it. And the OECD also has, for each country that has signed up to this instrument, a network of national contact points. And I think there are many businesses here who are headquartered in OECD countries. So get in touch with your national contact point. These bureaus basically help promote and provide resources to businesses on what exactly these standards are, and can be a real resource as well for you. Not the same as Amphori, which tends to be much more specific and business savvy, but think about your governments. And then finally, I would just say, for many of these issues that we're trying to deal with, it's very, very complex issues. So it's only through collaboration. And I'm extending collaboration outside of businesses to collaboration with local policymakers and governments in producing countries. Also, unions was mentioned. Thank you for that. I think that's super important. And civil society, including local civil society, people who are on the ground, who see what's happening and can offer real solutions on the ground. But we all have a role to play. We didn't talk about pricing, but that's important, and purchasing practices, another key factor into, really improving lives of people at the end of the day. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more voices?
I'm pleased to have heard so many voices from our members and from the OECD colleagues. From my side, it's Anna here from Amfori. I really would like to reiterate two of the red threads that we have heard across all presentations. So yes, technology has a big role to play in helping businesses and helping all stakeholders related to supply chain to understand risks and to gather data that can support the generation of a positive impact within supply chain. But we've also heard that the soft factors, trust, engagement with businesses across the supply chain, with other players such as government, civil society, plays a role. We heard it in the examples that have come to us today, and also in the work that OECD is doing. So I think this is a good takeaway for us. Yes, technology helps us, but the human component, the engagement from the people that make up the businesses is also very relevant in the journey towards transparency.
Thank you, Anna. And with that note, I would like to close our dialogue of today and give a special thank for our incredible panel, our audience of today as well. I know we are running a bit ahead of time, but that was a very fruitful discussion. I think there is much more things to be said and continue talking. I will invite you all to keep tuned, engage it, and check the next Unleash Opportunity sessions at our website. And I wish you a good day and a good afternoon. Bye-bye.